We are rolling. 3, 2, 1.
Let's go.
Happy Monday to you.
Happy Monday. Oh my gosh, we're filming this on a Monday and it's coming out on a Monday.
See, Mindset Mondays have to be filmed on Monday because we're our wisest on Mondays.
We are. We're fresh.
Yep, it's before we've seen a ton of clients. We're ready to talk about stuff. I think today's topics are going to be a really good one.
I know. Shall I introduce it?
Please do. Please do.
Okay, so we got so much feedback about these GLP-1s, the GLP-1 episodes. So if you missed that, go back and listen because it was a really good conversation about just our perspective on different weight loss drugs as dietitians.
Yeah, over the years.
And obviously we know that GLP-1s are the hot and trending thing. There's a lot of conversation about them. There's a lot of criticism. There's a lot of misinformation and misuse going on, and also some really legitimate use cases, and people are seeing really great results as well. So it's GLP-1 part 2.
Perfect.
And we're going to structure this a little bit differently than last time. That's okay with you?
Yes.
So when we have clients that are either considering going on a GLP-1 or are starting a GLP-1 weight loss drug, we spend an entire visit talking about it, whether that be weighing the options, talking about the benefits, potential drawbacks, whether or not they specifically are a good candidate. That's always a really important conversation to have. And this is just us, giving our kind of dietitian perspective, right? We're not an endocrinologist. We can't prescribe these things, but we can talk about, what are the different metabolic components that would make someone a potential candidate for something like this, something to talk to their doctor about, just kind of helping tee them up for that conversation.
Absolutely.
And of course, we manage those very real lifestyle implications that are a result of the GLP-1s.
Perfect.
So today I would like to structure this as kind of like a sneak peek into what a conversation would be like with a patient who is considering a GLP-1.
Yeah.
And kind of like what are the, what's the like nutrition 101, the lifestyle 101 to kind of pair with something like this? What are kind of like the survival tips, right? So like how to manage a low blood sugar episode, for example, and what to have on hand for those types of situations. And really kind of just give someone a sneak peek into like what that conversation would be like so that they can hopefully be better equipped. And if they need a little bit more individualized support, they know where to find it.
That sounds perfect.
We good?
It makes me think like there's going to be 4 sections in my brain, at least when you say that. It makes me think there's what you would call like the fit conversation, which is let's sit down and talk through, who are the people that would benefit from this? Is it a good idea? What are the pros and cons? Let's SWOT analysis with that patient that's sitting before us. We have then, assuming the answer is yes, the onboarding phase, which comes with a whole host of considerations, pitfalls that dietitians can give a lot of tips and tricks about. We have our sort of what I'd call our action phase, where we're on the med, we're at the dose, and we're doing things with that med as the bumper's on our bowling lane. And then we have sort of the passing the baton or the landing phase, where we're trying to pass the baton to just the life habits to then sustain the results.
Yeah.
And what I'd say too is, I think there's, within the industry, I'm noticing that people are more inclined to come see us. And that's a good thing. And I'd emphasize that meds like this do not replace the need for a dietitian, nor do they replace the need for life habits. In fact, they make them more necessary. If you use the med as your entire intervention, it will fail over time.
Yeah.
But if you use this med appropriately, which I think we can speak to across this sort of timeline we're talking about, these meds have a lot of potential value. And we are very well equipped to help people along the way. And I think if anything, especially when I see how little doctors actually know about how these meds truly affect people, they can report general side effects and all of that, but they are not there to really troubleshoot a lot of the things that we want to make sure they consider. I think these are something that's like, if you're not working with a dietitian closely, you're missing out on a really serious lifestyle opportunity.
1000%. Yeah. I mean, the clients that I see that are able to maintain a lower dose of this med and are able to see better results with a lower dose because they have that lifestyle component. It's just incredible. And it breaks my heart to think that there are people out there taking it that don't have this support. And another thing that always breaks my heart is when clients come to me and they talk about how they're considering a GLP-1, but I'm afraid that I'm cheating or I'm taking the easy way out.
Yeah.
So if I was your patient, I was saying that to you, what would you respond?
Ooh, that's a great one. You're taking the easy way out if it's the only intervention.
Yeah.
Because that's really when we think about a lot of that fear, it comes from the media's portrayal of these meds. And some of that is rightfully so. We have a massive amount of people flooding the market to take these medications and getting prescribed max dosages that diabetics would take, and then only using that as their intervention for weight loss. And it's causing, cachexia and muscle loss. They're basically melting away. And that's a delusional pursuit of health, right? That's health in quotations. They're sacrificing health in addition to potentially benefiting. It's a very mixed bag, and it's hard to say case by case whether it's a net positive. And so that has been sort of the to-market strategy. And as a result, the comment of like, oh, you're cheating, that's where that lives, is that idea that, hey, you're not actually making the lifestyle changes, you're just relying on this medication. What I will say is that if that is what's actually happening, if that's what you're doing, you will eventually either A, get used to the med, your body will get saturated in terms of receptors, and over time you will get used to the medication and it will become less effective. And then you will be left now on the other side of that med with nothing to protect you. Or you will come off of the med and you will have no habits to protect the new you. And as a result, those habits will not be there, which means the results will not be there. And so to those that are quote unquote cheating, what I'll say is the consequence is already there, because they're about to start their next yo-yo diet. And this time they're going to lose a bunch of muscle mass. They may develop gastroparesis. They're likely to give themselves reflux. I hate that for them, and I really hope that we can get to a place where we are not allowing that to be the norm. But right now, the majority of people that are taking it inappropriately. So I'd sit down with a client and I would say, much more concisely, hopefully, but no promises.
Let's assume I am a good fit. What would you say to me?
Yeah, I'd say that we want to make sure that less is more would be the first comment I'd make. These medications are often advertised as an appetite suppressant, which that is part of the conversation, but they really do a lot of other things. GLP-1 is a hormone in our body that's at the top of our digestive cascade that communicates downstream, and it makes your body more sensitive to insulin. It activates certain anti-inflammatory pathways. It does a lot to our systems that basically make our body metabolically more efficient. That happens at a lower dose, which is really what we're most interested in. That's the thing that we're studying, that we're seeing benefits in a lot of specialty populations, which we can come back to. And then from there, as the dose increases, you do start to see that GLP-1 in the body does cause the stomach to close. So it'll cause that gastroparesis effect, which means you will get more full on smaller portions. And so for me, less is more. I'm interested in finding a dosage that allows you the benefits of the anti-inflammatory and the insulin sensitivity and basically the metabolic efficiencies that may curb appetite and allow portion control to be something that feels a bit more intuitive or supported in some way. And then at lower doses, we still do get some benefit of what they call that dopamine severing, which is foods that are really dopamine triggering for people that light them up like fireworks, which is what makes them likely to want to binge them or to overeat them. It kind of neutralizes that for a period of time and can allow food neutrality to go from being a delusional aspiration to actually being something they're physiologically feeling. And sometimes feeling that way is an important precursor to being able to trust that it's actually a possibility in the first place. So I'd say less is more for those reasons. I want to find the sweet spot for your body that allows us to experience the benefits of the medication without starving you to the point that we can't keep adequate intake in, or leave you so drained that you're barely moving and barely exercising and you're just basically melting away. I want these to be bumpers on the bowling lane, and then I want you to spend a bunch of time practicing getting better at bowling strikes, is what I'd say to a patient.
I love that.
To get
That's
things
a great
rolling.
way to put it. I love that. Yeah, I think some of the criticism, understandably, has come from people who have done strictly diet and lifestyle interventions for weight loss, and they have been successful. And I'm so happy for them, especially if they do it in a safe way, right?
Yeah.
And I would love to I feel like this is a whole podcast episode in and of itself, but I'd love to talk about why weight loss can be a healthy thing for somebody, and why it's maybe not always in and of itself kind of like health promoting, but why we're even talking about these things in the first place.
Oh, that's such a fantastic. I feel like we could probably do like a brief, you said, that may be a conversation for another day, but I think that we could definitely at least nudge it or talk about it.
Yeah, so let's talk about weight loss. Like, why Like, is weight loss in and of itself healthy? You know, just talk to me a little bit about why we're pursuing weight loss. Is being at a higher weight inherently dangerous? And if so, why and how?
Beautiful. Let's zoom out for a second. Our bodies are a giant group of systems, right? So it's one big system with a bunch of subsets in it, right? Each of our organs has its own function, does its own thing, plays its own role. And all of those sections, think of them as departments at a company, right? We've got this big factory known as our body, and we've got all the different areas of said factory that are our various organ systems. And they're all, as a result, competing for resources, right? They're competing for energy so that they can contribute their part to the factory. Our liver is what detoxifies and processes and metabolizes things. Our spleen is our immune hub and creates our immune system. Our bones create density. Our skeletal muscle allows us for movement. Our brain processes information. We could go on and on and on. But all of our organs play a different role and do different things. Your fat is an organ. And it is one of your metabolic centers.
Yeah. In fact, we used to think it wasn't metabolically active tissue. We used to think it was just there as an energy store. Now we know it to be metabolically active.
Exactly.
Tell me more about this.
It's both of those things, right? Yes, it is an energy store. It's an energy depot for long-term reserves, and it also can insulate us and help us temperature control. But one of its primary roles is that of energy distribution. So when you eat a meal, your fat cells are actually what direct traffic. They are the ones that say, hey, send that there, bring that here. And so just like when we exercise a lot, our muscles get louder and louder and louder and bring nutrition to us, which is why fit people tend to get leaner as a side effect. Absent a true caloric restriction, they become more metabolically efficient because their muscles are pulling energy. As fat cells grow, the fat cells also will signal louder. And you have what are called adipokines, which are fat signalers. And a way to think about it is the more body fat you have, and I'll actually asterisk that, the more body fat you have beyond the healthy range, your fat cells develop a microphone and then a megaphone, and they get louder and louder, and they start to dysregulate and dysfunction. Bring that here, bring that here. So obesity being diagnosed as a chronic disease is the observation that there is a tipping point in adiposity where the fat cells are so present and so robust that they are over signaling and overriding all of the other systems competing for resources and hoarding resources. And that stresses out your liver, that stresses out your kidneys, that stresses out all the other systems. And it becomes this self-fulfilling prophecy that once that body fat becomes so dysfunctional, chronic disease is inevitable. High blood pressure, high cholesterol, insulin resistance, all of those things happen as a result of your fat becoming too big of its own department, so to speak. And so the goal isn't to have no fat, it is essential, we need it. It is to have an appropriate amount of fat. And that is a very wide range across humans. There are gender considerations, or I should say sex considerations there. There are definitely ethnic considerations and, like in terms of heritage and ancestry. There are a lot of different factors that would give us that range. But when we are talking about obesity, we are talking about the point at which the body fat is so high that it is causing a dysregulation in the communication throughout the body and basically becoming a little bit too greedy.
Yeah. Okay, good. So kind of like to summarize it, it's like there is a wide range of body fat that is appropriate. When we talk about obesity, are we talking about weight loss as a medical intervention? We're talking about excess body fat that has kind of had the downstream effect of some metabolic dysfunction.
Or has the potential to do so. There's a proactive and a reactive. And what I'd argue there is the BMI chart was the first attempt at a proactive, right? Which is, a BMI of 30, which BMI is not body fat, right? BMI is height to weight. And so it is an extrapolation or an assumption that if someone's this tall, they probably weigh a certain amount. And as we've seen, there are such unique frames in so many different people that that's not always right? There is a lot of overweight people on the BMI chart that are very lean otherwise. A lot of athletes are going to be diagnosed overweight. And many will be considered obese. And so the BMI chart is not a great, but it's a quick reference tool, which is why it kind of was there. It was meant to say, hey, we're trying to flag this because the comment is by the time you have the high blood pressure, you have the high cholesterol, you have the insulin resistance, you've already done irreparable damage. It doesn't mean we can't walk some of it back, but we're not walking back 100% of it anymore. We're now trying to mop up a mess. The BMI chart in its most simple form is an attempt to try and let people know if they're approaching a point that is damaging. Body fat is definitely a better measure of that. It's just accessibility of it. And then also understanding what the ranges are, because there's this skewed perception that being excessively lean is valuable when that's actually contrary, right? There's a point at which you get so lean that you're just going to have different things that kill you. And so the goal is to be in the sweet spot and in that range. But weight loss, to your point, is really meant for people that we look at them metabolically. We look at their body composition, we look at their lifestyle, we look at their labs, and we can say, okay, your labs are obviously out of range and it's because there's excess body fat. We are now in a place where we're trying to be proactive and reactive. We're trying to reverse it before there is a heart attack. But then there's also the point at which it's, hey, your body fat is definitely outside of the healthy ideal ranges that we'd look at. Which, just to give a perspective, for guys is going to be 8 to 20%, and for women is going to be 16 to 32% roughly. So pretty wide range of normalcy there, but it's just to give you a reference. If we're seeing someone outside of those ranges, they may not have metabolic dysfunction yet, but we know that their body fat is shouting loudly. And we want to make sure that we're not waiting until the diabetes happens. We want to make sure we're supporting them. And so I do think that that's part of the reason why most of our offices, we offer body fat as a consideration and conversation, is because it gives us a much better yellow flag, hey, let's inspect this, than BMI does, because BMI can be very missed. But body fat is a pretty good indicator of, hey, you're in a place where your body's feeling good, or hey, you're in a place where there's no problems yet, but we definitely are at risk of them. And I'd love to see if we can look at lifestyle habits and tweak them so that you can live like a lighter or healthier you.
Yep, absolutely. So yeah, weight loss for the sake of weight loss isn't always inherently healthy, right?
That is, well, so let's slow that one down real quick. What you just said, weight loss for the sake of weight loss isn't always healthy. And that is the world that we currently live in, where everyone thinks weight loss is health. And it may not be. Sorry to interrupt, but what you just said was perfect.
Yeah, I'm glad.
You're like, what can I say? Just the concise Devon, the dietitian over here.
But I like to clarify this because a lot of my clients do live in larger body sizes, and they have been stigmatized, especially by folks in healthcare, and there can be a little bit of mistrust there. And so we're not in the business of aesthetics, we're in the business of health. And so if excess body fat is either currently causing some metabolic dysfunction or could very likely become this if not addressed sooner, that's where we're stepping in with our diet and lifestyle interventions, and then sometimes also with these GLP-1s, just to circle it on back here. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. So we talked about some of the potential risks with having some excess body fat. I think that's really important to clarify when we're trying to figure out who's a good candidate, right? Again, this not for aesthetic purposes, this is a medical intervention. Yeah.
Are you at risk of metabolic, basically like spiraling for simplicity's sake?
Absolutely.
And if so, could a medication be a part of your intervention that helps you go the other direction?
Yeah. And I have a lot of conversations with my clients who are, again, just kind of like considering it. And I talk to them about how there is a difference between being in a larger body size and having the disease of obesity, right? That is excess body fat that is either currently seeing some metabolic dysfunction, or it being highly likely that this is something that will happen, or your age just getting in the way of you living your best life, right? Like you want a horseback ride, you want to be able to walk up the stairs without, or chase after your kids or grandkids without getting out of breath. If that excess weight that you're carrying around is getting in the way of you living your best life, then this might very well be a conversation that we should be having. Especially if you are like so many of my clients who have lived your whole life being in a larger body size and have tried all the things, tried all the diets, and you just find that it's breakfast and you're already thinking about lunch, and it's lunch and you're already thinking about dinner, and you're almost not ever not thinking about food. I just did a double negative. I hope that made sense.
I think it did.
So good. I love to, is there anything else you feel like we should add in terms of like what determines someone is a good fit to talk to their doctor about something like this?
Yeah. I think one of the pieces that, as you were speaking, that triggered in my head is so many diets and so many people look at this as they need to get lighter.
Mm-hmm.
But the goal isn't to get lighter, it's to stay lighter. So if we're sitting with somebody and we're saying, hey, you definitely are at a place physiologically where your body composition is not ideal for you, whether it's activities of daily life being limited, whether it's actual metabolic dysfunction starting to show up, or whether it's just we know we're at a composition where there's a high risk of it and we're trying to be sensibly proactive, not fear monger them and gaslight them into thinking they need to starve themselves to death, but being practical. Exactly, but being practical about the fact that, hey, you're not in an optimal place right now, and there is a higher risk that these things will happen. We don't need to put a gun to your head and run away aggressively, but we do need to start making some changes. The goal is not to get lighter, it's to be lighter. Living like the healthier you, for a lot of people, means being lighter as a side effect. And so if we can recognize that the goal is not to get lighter, then we need to start with interventions that don't just have the goal of getting lighter. These meds by themselves, the entire goal is just to get lighter. It is to optimize your body metabolically to create fat loss, and then suppress your appetite to create a caloric deficit, which causes you to just plummet on the scale. And that's, you see people with record-setting rate of weight loss, which I'm never impressed by the rate of weight loss, right? I would
more often concerned by that.
Yes, exactly. That's a red flag, not a green flag. That's, you say it, you brag about it, and you're not saying what you think you're saying, but it's to say that, you know, these meds will cause that. But if we're not actually learning to live like the lighter us, what are we actually doing? We're never going to keep this, right? A way to think about it is it's going to crash. And whether that's you're going to come off the med and you've not learned anything and it's going to skyrocket up, or you're going to get used to the med and then you're going to gradually just go back up. Either way, this intervention can't be the only intervention. And so when we're talking to a client, one of the things that for me is important is, are they in a mindset of living like the healthier version of themselves? Are they just trying to get the quick fix? Are they just trying to lose the weight? Or are they actually committed to the idea of trying to move forward with health and wellness? Are they willing to participate in their own rescue? Is my flat out expectation. Now, I may be working with a 600-pound person that they can't walk yet. So I'm not expecting them to go to the gym right out of the gates, but I am expecting them to show a willingness to change what they're eating. And it doesn't mean that they go completely organic and keto. That's not what we're talking about. But are they willing to make changes to their actual habits, the habits that got you here in the first place? A lot of people, it's not just the habits that arrived their body here. There can be other physiologic and pathological or pathophysiologic reasons, there we go, that can cause that. But if lifestyle was a part of it, we need to be untangling that. And so if I'm looking for someone that I'm going to say, hey, you're a great fit for this, it's likely someone that shows a desire to work on their health habits and be a healthier them.
Or have already started making a lot of those changes.
Likely, or even has maybe exhausted those. And so we see a spectrum there. Is if someone sits down with me for the first time and they're asking about this med, I'm very interested in what else they're planning on doing and willing to do alongside it. If it's someone I've worked with for a long time and we've really maximized health and wellness, but we're still looking at a physiological reality that is clearly not ideal, right? Which is, it's not just, to your point, someone that lives really healthy and is in a bigger body and just hasn't accepted that. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about somebody that's made all the health changes and their body is still fighting them. And if we didn't have medicine, they may have a genetic baseline that leads to a early death. And if they want to maximize their longevity and maximize their lifespan, this may be a part of the conversation. But the thing that's unanimous is, to some degree, a willingness to participate in their own rescue beyond just medical intervention.
That is huge. That, like, client best fit, because sometimes, let's face it, like, even if they're in our office, sometimes they're just not quite at the stage of action. When we think about the stages of change, there's pre-contemplation, which is, there's nothing wrong, I don't need to change anything. There's contemplation, which is, maybe it's time to start making some changes. There's the preparation, which is, okay, I'm gonna figure out what I'm gonna actually do. And then there's action. Not all of our clients are there, and that might not be a fault of their own. They might just be going through a legitimately crazy time in life, and it's just not something they can realistically commit to. And so when I'm looking for a client who's a good fit for this journey, it's, they have enough stability in their life, hopefully, if they've been able to create enough stability that this is a real reality, that they're going to be able to make some actual changes.
Yes.
So
let's dig into this then. So we have a patient that we've sat down with and we've talked through their physiology. We've taken body composition. We have labs. And through our conversation, we've ascertained with them that yes, they're a great candidate for this as a part of their lifestyle. And so they get access to either Ozempic or Wegovy or Semaglutide, which are all three the same things, just with various brand names, or they get access to Zepbound, Mounjaro, or Tirzepatide, which are also the same thing. So they get one of the six, right, through some group or some prescription or whatever it is, and they start it. The first month is always the lowest possible dose. For most people, the second month, which is the middle dosage, is where I like to encourage people to stop. That's, and as a reference, in Ozempic, that would be a half of a milligram. And in
so 0.5.
0.5, yep. And in the Mounjaro, the Zepbound world, it's actually a third dosage. It's the 5. Okay. So that they go up to 1 and 15 respectively, and 0.5 and 5 are the place that I always love to see if people can get a benefit from, because typically at that point there really are no side effects.
Yeah, we're looking for the minimum dose response, right?
They're not throwing up, they're not having headaches, they're not having crazy nausea, they're still able to tolerate protein, they're still able to eat meals. The food noise has gotten quieter, the portions have definitely become easier to manage, but there's still good energy and there's still good opportunity for exercise. So that's a typical, like, I'm always looking to see if that's a sweet spot. Yeah. Now, some people need more, and that's usually if they have actual insulin resistance, in which case going up to higher dosages can really help that. Going back to, these are diabetic meds. So max doses are meant for those that are so insulin resistant they're diabetic. Yeah. So these half and third doses are meant for people that may be pre-diabetic or even pre-diabetic. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Totally. And so in my mind, what I'd want to go through with you is, let's talk them through the first 2 months of the onboarding phase, which are, what are the things they may experience and what can we do about it? And then we'll dig into once they settle, what we can be doing, and then obviously when they come off. But what are the things you warn a client about when they're about to start the medication? Wow.
Where do I start? Definitely talking about hydration being so crucial.
Yes, it's huge.
It is very common to feel nauseated, and that is one of my clients' often biggest fears in starting this, is like, I don't want to be nauseated all the time. Yeah. And so I always talk about hydration. That includes not just water, but also electrolytes. Often I usually have them doing some form of supplemental electrolytes along with hitting their hydration goal on a daily basis to really help minimize some of that nausea. Another thing I will talk to them about is you can't be skipping meals. You need to have some consistent flow of food throughout your day, because what we don't want is to see a blood sugar low. And I feel like people who have been taking drugs like this for enough time have slipped up at one point, because we're all human, and missed a meal and had that experience of a blood sugar low.
Just feel awful.
And it is the worst feeling, right? You are maybe dizzy, you're lightheaded, you're probably almost certainly nauseous. So we want to avoid a situation like that. So really having a consistent flow of food, and that really means like thinking through your day-to-day life, right? If you're someone who works and travels a lot for work and you're in the car very often, you should always have an emergency snack on hand. You should have a snack in your book bag, in your purse, wherever you are. You should have something on hand, and you should also just be thinking about the flow of your day and where is food going to fall. We have to think about, are we going to pick the kids up on time? We have to think about, am I going to leave the house on time to get to work? We should also be thinking about our very basic need, which is nutrition. So that goes for any of my clients, but it becomes especially important because it is truly a dangerous situation to have low blood sugar. It can be even lethal. So that is a really serious conversation that we always have to have. And then another thing is to think about your portion size of foods and also your food choices. So if we're choosing really rich foods, like I always pick on fettuccine Alfredo, even though I love fettuccine Alfredo.
There's a time and a place.
Or your fried chicken, right? Those really fatty foods. What this drug does is it slows your digestion. And so anything else that also slows digestion has the potential to cause you have some issues, some reflux, some nausea, sometimes unfortunately even vomiting if we really go too far. So thinking very strategically about, how can we avoid a lot of these heavier, fattier foods for the most part? And when we do choose to indulge in them, being very thoughtful about our portion size, because we definitely don't want to feel sick. And that's honestly part of how the drug works, right? You can't as easily overconsume all of these rich, dense calorically dense foods.
Yeah.
And that's really strategic. So those are the few big things that come to mind for me. I know you've got some more, but hydration, having a good flow of food, so consistency in your meal frequency, and then avoiding some of those really rich fatty foods. What do you want to add to that?
Honestly, I think I would reiterate those, but I'll just add a little to kind of like build into the why.
Sorry, I was supposed to be interviewing you, Andrew.
Oh, no, it goes back and forth. You know that. Everyone wants to hear from you anyway.
Get my 2 cents in there.
Of course, of course. So when you think about what you were saying, there's a couple of things that kind of popped in my head. But what's funny is right out of the gates, we can already hear the intentionality that's required, which is why we talk about these meds have to have good habits. If you take these meds without good habits, you're going to feel miserable most of the time. And sure, you'll lose weight, but you're also going to have no energy, and you're definitely not going to exercise. And then your muscle is going to break down, and you're going to lose a whole lot of weight, but it's going to be muscle and water and some fat.
And that's going to make maintenance even more challenging.
It's going to make your metabolic rate go down. It's going to make your mobility go down. We're no longer chasing health like we've talked about. And so you can already hear where it's like, you better get better at your hydration, you get better at your meal patterns. Well, these are things you need to be doing anyway, right? And so I love that to a certain extent, it's why I call it bumpers on a bowling lane, is it forces you to practice what you need to be doing in the first place. But I always like to basically highlight what you said, which is hydration. This med mechanistically uses sodium. And it's because sodium is actually something that helps you sensitize your body to insulin. And so this med, as a part of the GLP-1 pathway, uses salt. That's through your aldosterone system in your kidneys. But you go through a lot more salt on these meds. And so you need to give yourself salt. If you are nauseous or headachy, chances are you are not getting enough sodium, or you are not getting enough water, or you're not getting enough of both.
Which, like sodium, I mean, like, not even to get into sodium too much, but it's very counter to what a lot of people have heard. Yes. A lot of people are being told to reduce their sodium, and we now know that to be not necessarily the case for most people, and especially in this instance. So definitely. I always tell people they should start their day with an electrolyte drink, and they should probably have an additional one later in the day. If you're not an extremely active person, it should be ideally a 0-calorie electrolyte beverage. But we want to get that sodium, and I would say that, going back to one of our conversations in one of our podcasts about electrolyte drinks, make sure it is a sodium dominant one. It is a Propel, a Gatorade Zero, a sugar-free liquid IV. Some people think they're choosing the better option by choosing the lower sodium, and then it's the exact opposite.
People get all excited about the Ultima rehydration, and it's a massive potassium supplement, which potassium is great, but like, we actually need the salt in this case. The salt is the thing that's letting the med work. It's activating the medication in a lot of ways, and it's keeping your digestive tract flowing as best it can. So make sure that you recognize you do need salt, and I would start your day with electrolytes to do so. Your meal patterning is spot on. I think that's so important. I tell people during this phase, we're going to watch what your appetite's going to do. You're probably not going to have, initially there won't be a ton of changes, but then we're not sure. You may be a bit more nauseous initially, so it may cause some changes that are temporary. I always say, don't lose sight of the pattern. And so I don't care if we pick breakfast, lunch, snack, dinner, so they're going to eat 4 times a day. I don't care if that's half an English muffin 4 times a day while you're getting used to this med. Don't lose the pattern, because the pattern is what we will be using to ramp up and eventually come off with. The pattern is the thing we're going to practice. To your point, missing meals, a lot of people just not feel hungry all day and they'll skip it. It's going to make you nauseous. It means you're probably not going to hydrate well, and you're probably going to end up with a headache. So make sure you're hitting your foods. Ideally, there is a carbohydrate in these meals. Your body really doesn't need to go crazy low carb on these meds. These meds help you metabolize carbohydrates and fats. Ideally, there is some carbohydrate. It's a good sponge in the digestive tract. It's easier on the stomach. It will give you some relief.
Pairs really nicely with our proteins and our veggies, because it really kind of helps us digest our food at an appropriate rate. And so I love all of that.
Absolutely. And then you mentioned, obviously, watching some of those heavier meals. This first couple months is kind of a tolerance phase. We're assessing what your body's doing with this. And so, let's keep it simple. Let's keep to a nice meal pattern, simple meals. Make sure we're hydrating and sipping fluids all day with electrolytes on the front end and back end. And if you're nauseous or headachy, run through. Are you behind on water? Are you behind on electrolytes? When was the last time you ate? When was the last time you had some carbohydrates? Those are the big 4 that are going to allow us to really simplify and stabilize so that this med onboards well.
1000%. The other 2 things I always think about is, like, reflux is pretty common. So what are the lifestyle modifications we can make for someone who's experiencing reflux?
Honestly, in my opinion, if they're doing those things, they're not going to. And that's kind of the point, is typically if you have reflux, it means you either overate, which likely means you underate for a period of time, and then overcompensated. It likely means that your digestive tract is turned off and it's a giant water slide, so you're probably not drinking enough water. Or the food choice that you made was something that was, deep fried, really fatty, or really spicy, or something like that.
Totally.
And so if we're keeping to a simple meal pattern, and we're keeping to hydration, that's going to, in my opinion at least, it's going to resolve 9 out of 10 instances of that.
Totally. And you might be a little more sensitive to, people have their individual sensitivities to different reflux, I guess, potential triggers. It could be things like marinara sauce, your tomato-based stuff, just because that naturally relaxes the lower esophageal sphincter that connects your esophagus to your stomach. So anything that can naturally kind of like loosen that sphincter can also cause some reflux, because your digestion is moving a little bit more slowly. So you might have to limit your tomato sauce, sorry to tell you, alcohol, carbonated beverages, and caffeinated beverages. All of those things are also potential.
Chocolate,
peppermint. We love all these things.
Peppers with capsicum. Yep. The list, it's funny, it's the normal reflux list.
Totally.
But it is to say that I would always encourage people to see if they can assess the thing behind the thing, which is those things tend to cause it if something else is wrong, particularly is the gut dehydrated or not processing properly.
Yeah, that's a good distinction.
And so treat your gut like an assembly line. Nice little meal pattern. Doesn't have to be timed to the minute, but give yourself a nice consistency. Make sure you're hydrating. And most of the time, small amounts of all of those things can still be fairly well tolerated, especially at lower dosages. Because that's the other piece, is if you're on these lower dosages, we shouldn't really be having crazy amounts of these symptoms anyway. And so,
shall we transition into kind of the maintenance phase of this?
Action mode.
One of the things I definitely wanted to touch on is like, what should people be doing in terms of physical activity, especially once they kind of are feeling like a little bit more adjusted, they have a sense of how their body's responding to it. What does that physical activity reality look like?
Exercise is the most important part of this. And
that's a big statement, but I totally agree.
Yeah, and it's because exercise, this med activates exercise. It causes a disproportionate, I always say, and it's not a precise comparison, but it's more accurate than I probably think. 30 minutes of walking is the equivalent of 30 minutes of running when you take this med. Like, that's what it does for you physiologically. It causes your body to be much more insulin sensitive, which improves its ability to use carbohydrates and also fats. It improves the body's ability to burn fats in exercise mode. And GLUT4, which is this hormone that secretes when muscles contract, works in hand with this to have your muscles screaming from their megaphone instead of your fat cells, which basically in the battle of the two, the muscles will then win. This med plus muscles secreting GLUT4 makes your body so much louder, and when the fat cells are saying bring that here to store, your muscles are saying absolutely the F not, bring that here to burn, baby, let's do this. And too often people will be limited on the activity, and they'll lose weight initially, and then it'll like kind of plateau, and then the doc will say, oh, well, you're not losing anymore, let's go up. And it's like, no, that's not it. Because all that's going to do is trigger them to go into like a very restricted caloric state. And now we're withering away, cachexic, right? Losing muscle mass. No, that is not the point of this. You need to move. And if you're not able to move, there are things we can do. But if you are able to move and you're not, then you shouldn't be on this med. That's part of that. I expect you to participate in your own rescue. Like, this is not the solution. It is the bumpers. You still have to roll the ball. It doesn't have to be a lot. 10-minute walk. And then work your way up. Like, we can really work with you to find those starting points. But any little bit of exercise, any little bit of challenging your body to move is going to have such a metabolic advantage. You don't need to go up in this med. You just need to allow your body to move a bit more. And that's one of the most important baton passes. Is like, if you ever hope for this weight to stay off and to keep what you're gaining during this journey, exercise is going to be a part of that team on the other side.
1,000%.
The lighter, healthier, happier you that you're aspiring to be, they're more active, whatever that means for you.
What I'm hearing is you're fairly non-specific, which I think is really crucial. It's like literally anything is better than
Get out of breath. I want you to be out of breath. That's what I want. I want muscles to contract. Like I couldn't be more vague because it really doesn't matter. I need you breathing, I need you out of breath, and ideally sweating every other day. And if you're doing that, you are setting yourself up to succeed in a massive way.
1000%. I always talk about they kind of really do work hand in hand. So you can't have one without the other.
Yeah.
Or if you're doing a GLP-1. So one thing I will kind of be a stickler for, and I talked about this in the last podcast, I'm going to talk about it again, is that strength training. Talk to me about what's the importance of strength training in doing GLP-1.
Yeah. So especially because it's going to be hard to not be in a calorie deficit during this. There is a tendency to lose some muscle mass. And so when we think about what is the best way to preserve muscle mass, resistance training is that. Even 2 days a week of resistance training can prevent the loss of muscle tissue. And that muscle tissue is going to be imperative as you age to prevent fall risk and help you continue activities of daily life long into your 60s, 70s, 80s, and hopefully 90s. That muscle mass is also your metabolic furnace. Right? Muscle is one of the most calorically burning cells that we have. If you're losing it, you're backing your metabolism into a corner, and it's going to make it exponentially harder. And so there's a quality of life to it, but there's also a calorie of life to it in this conversation that makes it really important.
That's really well said. I love that. So sounds like that is what's going to help kind of mitigate any significant losses in lean body mass, which is fairly to be expected. If you're in a calorie deficit, you're losing body fat. It's natural to lose a little bit of lean mass with it. What we wanted to be doing is preserving that as best as possible. And strength training is the best way we can do that. And also, of course, having adequate protein. So, okay, we're in this maintenance phase. I am really getting the ick from vegetables and protein. What can I do?
Oh, this is awesome. And I think I want to call that out to people so during this phase, some things are just going to sound less appetizing. And that's part of the reason why we're here. We're here to troubleshoot. We're here to trial things. But a lot of times, because your stomach is slow, things that digest slowly start to become unappealing. Protein digests exclusively almost in the stomach. So it feels like your stomach's just going to look at it. Like you said, it's going to have the ick. It's just going to
feel like a rock in your stomach.
Yeah. And the fiber of vegetables usually melts from the acid that's being limited by this GLP-1 mimetic. And so those foods, initially, they may be on the back burner a bit. And it depends. Part of the reason why I said less is more with these meds, the lower the dose, the less likely that is true. Right? The higher the dose we go, there's not a lot we can do at max doses at that point. To be honest, if I've met with people that come into me already on max dosages, dealing with these symptoms and desperate, and I have them to drink essential amino acid shakes, which aren't like the creamy protein shakes, but are like a liquid pre-digested aminos, and they drink it twice a day just to get enough protein. This is a reason to not go up so high. There's a point at which your body will start to tolerate or not tolerate protein anymore. And so it depends on who I'm talking to, what recommendations I'm going to make. For the people that are already like, we're already here, we're already not able to fit it in, I'm going to start with EAAs. I'm likely going to downplay the vegetables. I'm going to make sure they're sticking to consistent meal times. And we're going to look for easy to digest protein sources, things like your core power drinks or your ready to drink things. Your yogurts can be of value. Sometimes this is where stuff like protein cereals, you can sneak it in because it doesn't like look and feel as repulsive. And then I also say be opportunistic. A lot of times the afternoon or evening, protein feels more appetizing than the morning. So we may just need to have a bagel in the morning or half a bagel, which is a fairly protein-rich carbohydrate that soaks up the acid, gets our day rolling and gets us going, and save an animal source for the evening time when that actually feels a bit more appetizing. And so I'll always look for supplements if we can't find those protein sources, but between the hydration and the patterning and the low dosage, that's going to maximize the opportunity that protein is still tolerated. And then from a vegetable perspective, we can start looking at like, well, what veggies are better tolerated. Cooked vegetables are always going to be better tolerated.
Throw a handful of spinach in that pan before you throw your eggs in.
Exactly. Something that just allows them to exist within it. But here's the other thing, and this is something that I think, it's funny, I don't know that you and I have even ever talked about this. When I work with a client that is taking these meds, I challenge them to be eating more calories at the end of the action phase than when they started. So they're supposed to be eating more throughout this, and there's some reasons for that. Exercise, as we talked about, if we have them doing cardio 3 days a week and lifting twice a week, we're preserving muscle mass, we're letting the muscles have their megaphone and say, bring it here, baby, burn, well, we're in a metabolic oven, right? We're burning now.
We're seeing those energy needs go up.
Yeah, energy needs up, which means I want to put wood on that fire. I don't want to be taking wood away from that fire. And so I want to not only be using this as a place that we can create weight loss, I also want to be using this as basically a place that we can be correcting your metabolism, because so many people come into these and they've been starving themselves with diets their entire life, and they've backed their metabolic rate into a corner. And so part of the other reason I'm so adamant about a lower dose is because if you're on a max dose of this, my ability to overfeed you or adequately feed you, I'm not smart enough. I mean, you might be, but I haven't figured it out yet. And so, like, if you did, please do.
You and me both. We're in the same boat here.
But if we're on lower dosages, I can reverse diet people. Going back to what we just talked about, the patterning. When you start to onboard the med, it may be very simple, but we're practicing it. As you get used to the med and stabilized on the med, the food noise is down a little bit, the portions are good, but the tolerance is there. And so now I can start to use that pattern that we just installed, and we can start adding to it. That half an English muffin can become a bagel with a core power in the morning, right? That lunch meal that might have just been some rice and broth can have some chicken in it, and we might be able to put some spinach in there. We can slowly but surely start to reverse the diet up and watch calorie intake increase with activity. And the goal is, by the end of this 1 year or 2 year stint that you're on this med, we have you eating above your basal metabolic rate. We have you eating adequate meals, adequate protein, moving. All of a sudden we can hear that while on this med, you've used this as bumpers on the bowling lane to get really good at bowling. You are now living the lifestyle. Can we hear that you're living like the lighter you and the healthier you, incorporating foods, patterning foods, moving your body? I want habits to be scaling upward. And the more you choose to up the med instead of up the habits, the more you're failing yourself in the future. And so that is my challenge to everybody, is if you can't work on gradually eating more, you're doing it wrong. And now you may be an isolated case. Still come talk to us, because we can make sure that's true.
I had a conversation with a client who was about 4 months in to taking these drugs and had lost about 16 pounds and was really frustrated. And I was like a little confused at the frustration for a second. I was like,
this is a really good, I'm happy you're bringing this up.
Help me understand, like, what, you've lost 16 pounds. This is amazing. Like,
it should be faster. Obsession with that rate. We have such a screwed up perception of what is.
Debbie at Pilates lost 50 pounds.
She lost 50 pounds, exactly. And it's like, well, 15 of it was inflammation, and she lost 20 pounds of muscle and 10 pounds of fat because she starved herself skinny. What are you jealous of? Will you do me a favor? We've got a couple things here. I feel like we need to reiterate that weight loss and fat loss are not the same. I would rather a client come to me and lose 20 pounds and have it be 16 pounds of fat than have them lose 40 pounds and have it be 16 pounds of fat. Because there is a 20-pound muscle loss there that is going to set them up to break their hip when they're 70 years old. So, like, do it smarter is my first tip. But for everyone out there, what is a normal rate of weight loss?
I would say about 2 to 4 pounds a month. And the reason I'm not telling you per week is because we are not we don't run like clockwork. We don't lose weight on a consistent basis like that. There's so many fluid fluctuations that impact that weight loss. And so to adequately assess fat loss, I don't assess someone's fat loss progress any more often than every 30 days. That doesn't mean we don't collect data any more often than that. Have I talked about this before? I feel like this is...
We've definitely talked about this, but it's good to reemphasize here.
So that's often why I'm like checking in with my clients every 4 weeks to see how we're doing, right? It's not just about seeing the number go down, but it's not fair for me to assess your progress 2 weeks in. It's just, we don't have enough data.
I love
it. So 2 to 4 pounds a month is about what I would like to see for a healthy weight loss that's really minimizing that lean body mass loss. Think about that. That is 25 to 52 pounds a year. That's not too bad. Of fat. That's the thing is
when we talk about this, we're talking about fat loss. When you hear about Debbie at Pilates that lost 50 pounds in 60 days, that is not fat loss.
Debbie.
Physiologically, that is not what we're talking about. So here's a fun thing I like to tell people. So a 500 calorie deficit, right? That burns 1 pound of fat per week off of the body. And a 500 calorie deficit means that is 500 calories that your body wished it had to have your liver function and make serotonin to make your brain happy and grow your fingernails. It's not a non-loss situation. You are sacrificing 500 calories of nourishment to the detriment of other systems to temporarily oppress a different system. So let's recognize that this is a game of tug of war that we have to be.
By definition, under eating.
You are under eating. Beautifully said. That is tough on the body, so it's worth noting. That is 0.14 pounds of fat per day. In a body where the average woman fluctuates 5 to 8 pounds over the course of her infradian rhythm and menstrual cycle, and the average guy can have a 5 to 8 pound weight range based on hydration, dehydration, and digestive processes. So when how long does it take accumulating 0.14s to get past the 8 pound rhythm that is your natural? So like you said, 2 to 4 pounds of fat per month, which is a 250 to 500 calorie deficit, which is going to allow us to feed you above basal metabolic rate if you are exercising, which is going to allow us to keep essential tissues functioning, which is going to prevent starvation mechanisms, which slows metabolism in a very fast way, and preserve things like muscle mass and mood and energy and all of the things that matter. This is such a tightrope to walk. And whenever you see someone obsessing over the rate, they don't actually understand what they're supposed to be paying attention to. And I feel so bad for them because they're putting emphasis on something that is not only not the point, but it's also harmful.
Yeah, and I empathize because they're putting a lot of time and effort into this.
Yeah.
I get it. We want to have those results quicker than we do actually achieve them. But placing a timeline on a goal is almost the surest way to disappoint yourself and feel like a failure when really that 16-pound loss was a huge success.
I have a client who recently was on it for 2 years and they lost 35 pounds, but they lost 42 pounds of fat and gained 7 pounds of muscle.
Wow.
And do you think that person looks withered away, deflated, and scrawny?
No,
they look fit and fabulous. And that's the point, is you start to realize the scale is not the best indicator, right? We have someone that built muscle while on it because they weren't taking too high of a dose and they were able to prioritize proper meals. And so they were able to become more metabolically active. They were able to exercise more. And then we have a fat loss that is just pure fat, which means the skin remains a bit more like, turgid, is that the word? Where it has good volume to it. It's not as saggy. The face looks really healthy. Like there's a level of fitness and health to it that is just obvious. And if she had been staring at the scale the entire time, she would have been getting very, very, very discouraged, which speaks to the lack of awareness of what we're actually trying to accomplish, and also why the scale needs to be deprioritized. Doesn't mean it doesn't matter, but we need to understand how to use that tool.
1,000% with the other metrics that we have available.
Beautiful.
Perfect. Okay. So that was kind of like that maintenance, right? We can see how the first few weeks as we're adjusting might be a little bit tougher as your body's adjusting. You're starting to, just kind of see how your body responds, see what dose is appropriate for you. Try to work in those vegetables and protein and exercise strategically with some help. What if this is not something I want to do for my life? What if I want to find an exit strategy? What is my exit strategy?
I love it. So at this point,
you are my exit buddy for this.
Yes, exactly. We are here. We are going to be the skydiving person that you strap onto, and we're going to help you jump out of the plane. But you have to do what I say is the first thing I always joke. So couple notes. When people come off these meds, they tend to have a pretty big spike in their appetite. Not always. And if they've done it the way we've talked about, that spike is intensely manageable. It's very, very manageable. It may be even nominal for some people. If they're moving really well, fueling really well, eating up like we've talked about, the appetite spike's going to be pretty much non-existent. If there is an appetite spike, it is likely a nitrogen retention issue. So protein is our source of nitrogen. Our muscles retain nitrogen, and our body is really a nitrogen containing physiology, right? So all of our DNA and everything in us is composed of nitrogen. And so we would exit, if you have someone who's been unable to consume adequate protein for 1 year or 2 years while on these meds, they are inevitably in a nitrogen negative environment. And so as this med comes off, their body is going to suddenly have the physical ability to consume the nitrogen, and it's going to crave it, and it's going to make them insatiable. What people end up doing is they end up eating all the foods they used to eat or too much of the foods they currently eat. So they're not actually putting the nitrogen back. They're putting back a ton of carbohydrates.
They're replacing it with the wrong things.
And so they're not actually fulfilling that deficit. And they're also, carbohydrates boost metabolism, but also boost hunger. And so they end up getting worse and worse and worse and worse because they're not actually satisfying what that craving is. And so I have people prepared to consume for the first month they come off an excessive amount of protein. That would look like 50 grams a meal.
Wow.
For most people. For women, it may be closer to 30 or 40 per meal, but minimum 120 for a woman and minimum 200 for a man.
Wow.
And if someone reaches out to me during this phase and tells me that they're hungry and they don't know what to do and they haven't been eating that much protein, guess what the solution is? Eat that much protein. Like, it's that simple. I need you to overconsume protein. I need you to have the 8-ounce piece of meat at lunch and dinner. I need you to hit the 50-gram protein shake. We are trying to catch up on 2 years of nitrogen inadequacy. And I promise within 2 weeks, you will watch that appetite quiet down and calm down for most people.
Yep.
From there, guess what? We've been lacking on vegetables probably because we haven't been able to get a ton of fiber. Now it's time to eat those big salads. It's time to bring back the volume of veggies, the oven roasted or the air fried. And so the things that we may have had to minimize on the med to tolerate and feel okay, those are the things that have been lacking. Those are the things to put back. And so that is really the main thing. As I always say, that first step down dosage, right? You might go from a 0.5 to a 0.25 or a 5 to a 2.5 as an example. Let's add some protein back. And then we go to 0, let's add some vegetables. And so protein and produce, maintain your hydration focus, maintain your exercise focus, maintain your food patterning, and then add to those, don't add snacks, add to those meals. Make those meals bigger with protein and produce. If you do that, you're going to be golden.
Yeah,
I
love that.
Quick note before I let you add your additional thoughts. You will gain 3 to 5 pounds.
Thank you for saying that.
That is something I need to note. Nitrogen is heavy. Muscle weighs more than fat. Everyone rattles that off. That's because muscle is nitrogen retaining tissue. When you go from a half full muscle that is, think of it as a water balloon that's only half full, that's real limp
like
and flaccid,
raisin.
right? Little raisin, and you fill it with nitrogen and it fills back up. That weighs something. But what's so cool, I just had someone come in the other day that we just did this. We did their body fat, they came off the med, and they gained 5 pounds, and they were up 5 pounds of lean tissue. So it was lean mass up, not fat mass up, and that's a metabolic baseline. Your lean mass is higher, which means your metabolism's higher, you are protein restored, appetite has calmed down. So just know that there is going to be that, and that's yet another reason why people's obsession with the scale, it goes up 2 or 3 pounds and they freaking panic. Oh my God, no, I'm gonna go back to wherever I was.
Yeah.
That's not the full story. The scale is so many things. Your fat doesn't manipulate up and down that aggressively, but it is just a full note. If you're doing that correctly, you will see a spike on the scale from nitrogen retention and restoration, which is a good thing, not a bad thing. And also because you're adding more food to your gut, which means your intestines have more waste in them, which weighs something too. Keep moving, keep fueling, keep hydrating, stay on your grind. It's going to be okay, I promise.
I get it, man. I mean, like, people spend a lot of time and effort trying to get that scale down. The minute it starts to spike up, especially after coming off of a semaglutide, they're like, see, I need this, right? And, sometimes, a low maintenance dose is semaglutide for
some people do
use.
Objectively, some people do.
Makes
some people would benefit and some value could be had.
But don't be afraid of that spike.
Nope.
Thank you for saying that.
Yes,
thank you for saying that.
But that's how you land that plane. Is there anything else you'd want to add? Did I miss anything that comes to mind for you?
No, I think you really hit all of it. The only thing I'd really emphasize too is continue with that strength training, keep building that lean muscle, keep with that just activity level, because we know that continuing that physical activity for long term, there's functional benefit there, right? You're going to be able to carry groceries up the stairs when you're, in your 70s and 80s.
I love it.
And then also you're going to be able to better maintain that if you keep a high activity level. There are countless studies that show that maintaining that physical activity after a period of weight loss is what helps you really maintain
essential.
It. Yeah.
Yep. No, it's definitely, this med gave you a disproportionate reward or return on investment for activity for a period of time. It helped you break up with foods that you may not have had a great relationship with and neutralize them so that you could work with a dietitian to have a better balanced perspective on food. It was the bumpers on a bowling lane that allowed you to practice bowling, and that is relationship with exercise and movement. That is the physiologic changes as your body changed. That is the nutritional patterning and relationship with food. And when you finally get to take the bumpers off, don't stop bowling. You got to keep doing those things. We've passed the baton. The med helped these habits get going and reward you. The thing that keeps you here is now those habits. If you want to be the lighter you, you must continue to live like them. And hopefully we've learned enough in this 1 or 2 year span that you've become that person.
Yeah.
And it's an
and you
identity.
enjoy it. And you enjoy it. Side note, I always use bumpers when I'm bowling.
Do you? Oh, so you just need to practice bowling strikes a bit more. I'm going to be honest with you. I would not have assumed you were a good bowler.
What makes you think that?
I don't know. It's probably because I'm more privy to your injury history and fall history.
You see me swing a golf club once or twice.
I may know too much to think that you would roll a bowling ball down a lane well.
Conversation for another day.
I was going to say we digress.
Okay, so before we wrap up, there are some really interesting things that we were talking about before this recording started about what is on the horizon in terms of these GLP-1s and what else could they potentially be used for? So
much.
Fill me in on some of the stuff that you've been hearing about.
Perfect. I will preface this with, this is the part of the podcast where we say we are about to talk about new and evolving science. And so this is not necessarily prescriptive at this point, but it is where things are going and what we will as practitioners always be keeping an eye on. So GLP-1, glucagon-like peptide 1, is, again, in our body. And these meds are a mimetic. They are basically just a synthetic version of it that also lasts longer, essentially. But we've got Apollo coming. He just woke up from his nap.
He can't be alone.
He's been napping this entire time and is just too tired.
It was good timing,
He's just too tired. But so these GLP-1 in the body, it is the top of a cascade and it does a lot of things. And so one of the things that I'll point out is, for example, GLP-1 is involved in our AMPK cascade, which is the precursor to our anti-inflammatory processes. And so there is evidence that suggests that GLP-1s will reduce inflammation independent of weight loss. And so without the actual weight loss side, which, yes, if you have excess adipokines and your fat cells are secreting and being too loud, that can cause inflammatory issues. Well, this med, independent of you depleting those fat cells to quiet the adipokines, can also improve anti-inflammation processes. And so when we think about autoimmune disorders and inflammatory conditions, these meds have potential to be a part of an intervention that could help maintain or reduce flare-ups in immune disorders and flare-ups in inflammatory conditions. And even further, we have to be thinking about some of our insulin-resistant conditions like PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome,
which is characterized by insulin resistance, which is exactly what these GLP-1s address.
Exactly, and so there's potential for low dosages of this to be beneficial in maintaining remission from the actual cysts themselves or the symptoms associated with it. And we take it a step further. Alzheimer's. There's many reasons that Alzheimer's can occur, but one of them is insulin resistance in the brain. And so insulin sensitivity could, in theory, actually have some benefit there. And so what we're talking about these are all what we'd say biologically plausible mechanisms. So when we're assessing them, we're saying that we can look at that area of the body and we can explain mechanistically how it could work. Now we just need to study it to make sure it does.
We need the evidence to support it.
And it's likely that it's not going to just be this cure-all. It's going to be a part of other interventions, just like what we just talked about. But be on the lookout for these meds getting prescribed in people with autoimmune disorders like rheumatoid arthritis and other inflammatory conditions like fibromyalgia. Again, things like Alzheimer's and other mental deteriorations, and our hormonal conditions like our PCOS as a value add to help maintain. And I can tell you anecdotally that there have been some cases that we've been working with here at Case that's been very true for. I watched a patient's C-reactive protein who had rheumatoid arthritis drop from an average of 12 to 15 for a decade to under 2, which is a normal, within 2 months of taking this med after years of positive lifestyle.
Wow.
No weight changes. This wasn't a result of fat composition change. This was purely a result of GLP-1 being upregulated in the bloodstream. Wow. And that's not the only version, but it's to say that there are studies happening now. There's actually a lot more research on it than I realized. One of our interns, he just finished his thesis project, and he actually shared a lot of that data. So
shout out Jesse.
Yeah, Jesse, we appreciate you, brother. But it is to say that these meds have a lot of potential validity and value in combating a lot of this. And the other thing I'll note, just as a final accent, is our society has higher incidence and prevalence of PCOS and fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis and autoimmune conditions than pretty much any other culture in the world. And we also have higher rates and incidence of obesity. And at some point, we have to recognize that these things are correlated. Yes, we can't say they're caused, but they may be caused by the same things, which means the medications and lifestyle interventions that help them may also be the same. And that is where lifestyle is a very, very, we're in an exciting time for our career, because what we do has so much value in almost every problem. It may not be the absolute solution, but it is always at bare minimum the support of it. And it is definitely necessary for there to be a solution.
Yeah.
And so I'm very excited about what's coming.
I'm really excited. I feel like for a long time it felt like we were existed in these kind of silos, doctors and dietitians, and now, especially with these GLP-1s, we have to work together really closely.
Collaborative medicine is here,
and so it's really exciting.
Lifestyle medicine, and it's what we've been witnessing. We work with so many physicians that practice lifestyle medicine. They recognize medication is a part of an overarching intervention, and we recognize that same thing. This is not a med-first initiative. This should be, how can the med support or help, or how can it either help corral things like these meds, or how can it be the cherry on top that ignites what's going on? But lifestyle medicine is a beautiful movement, and we're really excited to be on the front lines of it. So as we learn more about the other reasons, rationales, and potentials for these meds, we'll make sure to do another follow-up episode on this and
this
release
is not
that
our last
content.
Episode on
we're always learning, always growing, and we're always trying to stay up to date for all of you. So
awesome. Well, as always, this is not designed for medical care. This is really just for educational purposes, but I hope that you got something out of this today.
Always.
This was a really great conversation. So thank you so much for sharing all your knowledge, for kind of giving us that sneak peek into what that conversation would look like with a patient who's considering going on these. This was so useful. I cannot wait to send this to so many of my clients.
I have a feeling this is just like the weight loss meds one that we did earlier this year. That podcast episode, I forget how many listens it has on Spotify, but it's a very high number for us. Awesome. And this is why. So hopefully this was helpful. Like you said, thank you all for listening. Until next time, we will be well.
Be well.